Good day. What I'd like to do today is to talk about disenfranchised grief or recognizing hidden sorrow. And as we move to the first slide beyond the title slide, an intercultural dialogue, I always want to remind people I speak from a North American perspective. That's where my research is, that's where I work, that's where I live. And so I think you as listeners to this One Life Alive program really have to focus on how this is useful to you in the Brazilian context. But let me begin with the next slide. One of the things that every society has, and one of the things that every society does, is it has norms about behavior. What's acceptable to do and what's acceptable not to do. So we know we don't push ahead in a line. We know how we're supposed to deal with other people. But one of the things we sometimes forget is that these norms are really not just about external behaviors, but also about internal states. A number of years ago, Dr. Hochschild wrote a paper on what she called feeling rules. And what she meant by that was that every society has rules about what one is expected to feel in certain circumstances. So, for example, you might say, I have every right to feel angry, or, you can understand why I feel guilty. But I think we have to see this as even beyond feeling rules, that these rules really represent not just feelings, but any kind of internal behavior, what we're expected to believe and what we're expected to think. And some of these rules are what we might call grieving rules. And grieving rules tell us, it's okay to grieve these situations or these conditions. And basically, at least in North America, what these grieving rules say, it's acceptable to grieve the loss of family members. When a family member dies, you can be expected to grieve. You might get time off from work because you're dealing with grief. You're expected to grieve when family members die. As we see from the next slide, though, not all losses are death related. Some of them, as we see in the next slide, we've always recognized that grief reactions do not necessarily entail death. For example, in our literature, we've spoken about the grief that people experience in the course of an illness, the anticipatory grief. It's not just because people are anticipating death, but they're grieving all the losses associated with the illness. The fact that one has to leave a job, for example, that one loves, or one loses certain abilities. We've also spoken about what we call secondary losses. And secondary losses are losses related to a primary loss. A number of years ago, a mother of a 19-year-old son said to me, when her son died of a sudden death, a brain aneurysm, not only did I lose my son, she said, I simultaneously lost all of his friends. So we experience losses when we have a death. But there's still other losses we experience. If you look at the next slide, any transition, even positive transitions, may engender a sense of grief. For example, think about maybe graduating from college or graduating from high school, and there was a sense of great pride, but you also recognize that there were people and places you would no longer be connected to in the same way, and that might have caused an undercurrent of grief. So even the happy occasions of our life, any transition, involves the notion of grief and loss. And as we look at the next slide, we see what William Worden says. William Worden's a wonderful grief therapist in the United States, and he reminds us that any change, even positive changes, offer components of loss, and that loss generates grief. And that's what I would like to talk about today, the griefs that we don't recognize. As we